April 27th, 2011. Some tornadoes hide behind the rain and take you before you ever see them. This one wanted to be seen.
Oh my God!
It came out of the west as a black wall taller than the horizon, dragging a curtain of dust and shattered timber. And for 80 miles, it never flickered. It never lost its nerve. By the time the people in its path understood the shape of the thing coming for them, it was already more than a mile wide, and it was not going to slow down for a single one of them.
Oh my God, look at everything flying out of it. Let's go take care of it. Let's go. Let's take the shit off the port.
For an hour and a half, one storm would cut a scar across the state of Alabama that can still be traced from space today. 64 people would die in the 91 minutes this tornado spent on the ground. To understand how that is even possible, you have to go back 2 days before it ever touched down. It began on April 25th, when the atmosphere started showing its hand. Tornadoes dropped one after another from Texas into Tennessee, and by the time the sun set that night, forecasters had counted 64 of them. The next morning, the threat slid east and produced 50 more. Most people treated it like ordinary spring weather, the kind the South lives through every year. It was not ordinary weather. It was a rehearsal. Deep overhead, warm Gulf moisture, and a diving cold front were sliding into an arrangement that comes together maybe once in a generation. And the entire deep South was sitting directly beneath it. By the morning of the 27th, the meteorologists had stopped asking whether it would happen. They were asking who it would happen to. On live television, forecasters told people plainly that this was not a normal day, that somebody in the region was about to be hit very hard, and that anyone living in a mobile home needed a plan before the afternoon arrived. You could hear it in their voices hours before the first wedge ever formed, a kind of quiet dread underneath the professionalism, because the data in front of them was worse than anything most of them had ever seen.
A very dangerous storm. While we look at the large Tuscaloosa tornado that is approaching the city, again, we should point out there is potential for a violent tornado.
The morning storms came first, and even those were violent. Tornadoes ripped through the northern half of the state before lunch, knocking out power to whole towns and stripping the sky of the daylight that would have given people warning later. It meant that by the time the truly monstrous storms formed in the afternoon, thousands of people had no electricity, no television, and no radio. They were about to face the deadliest storms of their lives, blind and unwarned.
If you're just joining us, this is a live camera from Tuscaloosa. It's popping in and out because we're losing data, losing power here, but we have a monster tornado bearing down live right now in Tuscaloosa.
2:54 in the afternoon, along the Mississippi state line, a supercell went up that would become a disaster. 15 minutes later, the first tornado warning was issued for it. The countdown had started, and almost everyone it was counting down toward was going about an ordinary Wednesday. 4:43 in the afternoon, in Greene County, the storm lowered an enormous wedge to the ground. A meteorologist in the field caught it on camera. It was the first hard confirmation that the monster was real, that it was already down, and that it was steering straight for populated areas.
My gosh, look at the size of this tornado. This is a massive, massive tornado, folks. Please take cover immediately.
Even in these early miles, it was tearing 100-year-old trees out by the roots and folding the first buildings in its path into piles of board and brick. For any other storm, that would have been the peak of its power. For this one, it was barely a warm-up. Ahead of it lay Tuscaloosa, more than 90,000 residents, nearly 32,000 students at the University of Alabama, and a city that did not yet know it was about to be split into two eras. The tornado gathered strength as it closed the distance, feeding on the unstable air like blades inside a blender. There was almost no time left for anyone to run.
All right, I'm going.
5:10 in the afternoon. The tornado reached the edge of the city, and it was no longer anything you could call a funnel. It was a moving mountain of rain and debris, half a mile across, swallowing the skyline block by block. Its first serious blow landed near 35th Street, where it snapped a cell tower, followed by leveling industrial buildings. Then, with a kind of cruelty that felt almost intentional, it scored a direct hit on the county's emergency management agency, the one building meant to coordinate the rescue that was about to be needed everywhere at once. By the time it reached the Rosedale and Forest Lake neighborhoods, the destruction had crossed into something total. Jeanette Barnes was inside her home watching the coverage when the meteorologist on her screen said the tornado was almost on top of her street. She barely made it before the house came apart around her. Underneath the pile that had been her home, she was still breathing. And when her neighbors dug her out, she stood up into a landscape that no longer existed. A neighborhood erased down to its foundations, including the neighbors who had not been as fortunate as she was. 5:14 in the afternoon. The tornado crossed one of the most recognizable intersections in the entire city, 15th Street and McFarland Boulevard. Chief Meteorologist Richard Scott was on the air, telling Tuscaloosa to shelter.
If you're outside, hey, take shelter now. The lightning is a big threat.
What the broadcast did not say, because he did not yet know it himself, was that the storm's next target was his own house and a few doors down, the home of his colleague, Jonathan Newman. Newman threw himself into the bathtub as the tornado reached the block, and it passed so close that only a handful of walls stood between him and the center of it. He lay there and listened to every window in the house explode, to the storm dragging furniture across the rooms above him, and somehow the walls around that tub held. He survived on the margin of a few inches.
I started hearing all the other windows in the house going out, and stuff was just flying around, so, banging in the walls. And yeah, it was definitely the scariest thing I've ever been through.
The tornado did not care about the city's landmarks. Stores, restaurants, parking lots, the DCH Regional Medical Center, University Mall, all of it fed into the same grinder. Cars were tossed end over end into the wreckage of buildings. Roads became impassable. The storm chasers and residents who reached the damage minutes later kept reaching for the same word over and over, and the word was apocalypse. One of them said it did not look real, that it looked like something from the end of the world rather than a street they had driven down 1,000 times.
I'm not exaggerating when I say it looked as though it was the apocalypse.
It kept accelerating, and its speed was the killer inside the killer, because it stole away the last seconds people needed to reach shelter. In Beverly Heights, a University of Alabama student named Lauren Brown had gathered with friends in a small house. On the phone, she told her mother that she was scared.
I called her and she said, "Mom, I'm scared." I said, "Baby, it's okay. Get your head down." And at that moment, WSFA had gone to the live view of the Tuscaloosa camera.
Her mother, watching the live tower camera from another city, recognized exactly where that lens was pointed and exactly what was filling the frame. She watched the wall of it slide straight toward her daughter's roof, with nothing on earth she could do to stop it. She dropped to her knees and begged for it to pass her child by. The house was destroyed. Lauren and 3 of her friends were killed where they sheltered, and her mother knew it before anyone told her, because she had watched it happen live. 5:16 in the afternoon. Alberta City took the full weight of the storm. Homes were reduced to their bare studs in seconds. Alberta Elementary School buckled and collapsed under the pressure, and the only mercy of that entire hour was that the school was closed and empty when the walls came down. Rescue crews moving through the ruins afterward described being so overwhelmed, pulling the living out of the debris, that they had no choice but to step past the dead and keep moving. You could hear smoke detectors chirping across the flattened blocks, with no one left to answer them. 5:25 in the afternoon, it slammed into Holt, tearing frame homes down to splinters. And then it found Holt Lock and Dam Road, a stretch lined with mobile homes and trailers that stood no more chance against it than paper in a fire. It shredded them along with the people who had nowhere else to go. Families who made it into basements described the house above them shaking itself apart in the span of 5 minutes. At Hurricane Creek, the tornado ripped apart a railroad bridge, lifted a 34-ton steel support into the air, and threw it 100 feet up a hillside as if it weighed nothing at all. At a lakeside marina, it sucked boats off the surface of the water and flung them nearly 300 feet inland while people on the shore were cut down by flying debris. Then it aimed itself at Birmingham and it tried to disappear. Radar showed it weakening to EF3, and for one fragile moment there was a flicker of hope that the worst had passed. There would be no miracle.
The circulation with this, about 1.5 miles wide, that's likely what we're seeing in the picture there. A very wide combination of tornado and rotating thunderstorm whose updraft is basically all the way to the ground.
5:40 in the afternoon. Cameras caught it crossing into Jefferson County and drawing in fresh energy, and it came back to full EF 4 strength meaner than before. It grew wider, darker, and by now, it was so enormous that television crews physically could not fit the whole vortex into a single frame. It had become a wall of night moving across the land in the middle of the afternoon. In Concord, it left nothing. Nearly 3,900 homes that made up that community were gone. By the time the tornado was done, close to half the town was gone. Somewhere near 1,400 houses wiped down to bare concrete slabs in a matter of seconds. Near McDonald Chapel, it lifted a 35-ton coal car off the rails and hurled it 400 feet through the air. In this stretch alone, 29 people lost their lives, and now Birmingham itself, a city of more than 200,000, sat squarely in the crosshairs. Forecasters put a tornado emergency on the air for Birmingham.
There is a tornado emergency for Birmingham, Alabama. So, folks, Birmingham, on the north side of Birmingham, large wedge tornado is now making its way to the east very rapidly, probably about 50 miles an hour. It looks like it's going to pass to the north of downtown.
On radar, it registered as a 1.5 mile wide debris ball moving at 50 miles an hour. A rotating column so wide its updraft touched the ground across its entire face, and it was going to pass just north of downtown at almost exactly 6 o'clock. 6:08 in the afternoon. In Pratt City, it drove into the neighborhoods with renewed fury. Brick homes lost their roofs and their entire upper floors. Schools and churches folded in on themselves. Michelle Perkins got her children into the basement with seconds to spare. And for 3 minutes, that felt like 30 minutes while crouched, feeling the house tear itself apart above their heads, feeling the whole structure rock beneath them.
We could hear the house tearing up. We could feel it. We were rocking. And when we came out, we walked upstairs and we could see the sky.
Her 72-year-old neighbor was killed at the very center of the impact. All across western Birmingham, the storm found people who had done everything right and killed them anyway. In one home, a man was pulled slowly out of another survivor's grip, both of them clinging to the same shirt as the wind dragged him toward the opening. And then, in an instant, the storm stopped and let go, and he was still there. Not everyone got that ending. In western Birmingham and the surrounding communities, the tornado claimed 20 more lives. It crossed Interstate 65, still nearly 1.5 miles wide, snapping metal light poles in half and lining the highway with hundreds of uprooted trees. It battered Fultondale, and then, at last, even something this vast began to run out of whatever had been feeding it for the last hour and a half. "6:14 in the afternoon, about 2 miles north of Tarrant, the tornado lifted off the earth, and it was gone. It had been on the ground for 1 hour and 31 minutes. It had traveled 80 2/3 miles without a single break. At its widest, it stretched 1.5 miles across, with winds estimated near 190 miles an hour. It killed 64 people. It injured more than 1,500. And it did roughly $2.5 billion in damage. which at the time made it one of the costliest single tornadoes the country had ever recorded. And here's the part that is almost impossible to hold in your mind. This tornado was one storm. On the very same afternoon, in the very same state, another EF5 was carving apart the town of Rainsville, and dozens of other tornadoes were on the ground across the region at the same time. April 27, 2011, became the deadliest tornado day in the United States since 1925. In a single day, the storms killed 316 people. Across the several days of the outbreak, hundreds of tornadoes shattered records that had stood for decades and forced a hard reckoning in how this country forecasts these storms, how it warns people, and how it studies the thing that came for Alabama that afternoon. The people who lived through it tend to tell you the same thing, more or less in their own words. Take in everything you have while you still have it. Hold the people close to you a little tighter than makes any sense. No one is promised tomorrow, and the ones who came out the other side of that hour understand it in a way the rest of us are lucky enough not to. You may not make every right choice along the way. You will carry the grief regardless. And somehow, in a town rebuilt over its own bare foundations, you will still, one day, be okay.